Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee for Monday, December 7th. I'm Paul Krikorian, joined by my colleagues, Mr. Bonin, Mr. Kretz, and Mr. Englander, and we're ready to begin. Members, do we have any general public comment cards?
No, sir, we do not have any general public comment.
All right, well, I'd like to begin then with general public comment. Is there anyone wishing to offer general public comment? Seeing none, general public comment is now closed. Members, I would like to propose as consent items number 3, number 4, 3, 4, 6, 10, 11, and 12. Any on those matters, members? And in the meantime, as we're looking at those, item 8 will be continued for 1 week without objection. Okay, again, 3, 4, 6, 10, 11, 12. Any objection, members? Seeing none, those matters are approved on consent. So the order of business then, members, is what I would like to propose is that we will do our usual departmental roll call on the FSR. We'll let everybody who's not called go back to work. We will then be prepared to recess the Budget and Finance meeting and begin the joint Budget and Finance and PAW Committee meeting, which is set to begin in 5 minutes. At the conclusion of that meeting, which involves a joint hearing on the coalition contract, we'll return to Budget and Finance to discuss the FSR and other motions on the agenda. So if there's no objection, that'll be how we'll proceed. So let's go now. We will go ahead and call the FSR item for purposes of the departmental roll call. Item 5.
Item number 5 is the CEO report relative to the second financial status report for fiscal year 2015-16.
All right. Just to set the tone, I have no questions for any departmental representatives. Members? Mr. Kretz.
Me too.
All right.
Except the difference is that I'm lying. LAPD, DOT, Animal Services, Personnel, and Housing.
Okay. I'm sorry, Mr. Bond. That was LAFD, LASA,
and HCID.
Okay. Mr. Englander?
I think they got them all covered.
Mr. Blumenfield?
Yeah, no additional. I've got some questions on the ones they're called.
Okay. So, just to be sure, the list I have is LAPD, Department of Transportation, Animal Services, Personnel, Housing, LAFD, LASA, and HCID. Anything else? All right. If you are not here representing one of those departments, thank you all very much for being here. See you next quarter. All right, and okay. So as they are exiting the room, we are going to well, actually, Mr. Kretz, what's your pleasure?
We could do the FSR.
Well, since we're doing it jointly, Mr. Rude just walked in.
Oh.
Okay, there we go.
In that case, we are.
All right, then the hour appearing to be 2:16. We're going to go ahead and recess the Budget and Finance Committee temporarily in order to take up the joint Budget and Finance Committee, PAW Committee consideration of the coalition contract. All right, we're now going to resume the meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee. And we will take up, continue consideration of item number 5. So I don't know if Mr. Santana is staying for the FSR or not, but why don't we go ahead and let's start by bringing up, okay. Mr. Santana, you're, okay. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Maria Gutierrez with the City Administrative Officer. In the interest of time, I think I'll go through the main points in our FSR real quickly, unless you want to get started on the departments.
Members, would you be interested in hearing the overview, or I think we're all probably pretty much up to speed? I think, unless you have questions for the CAO, maybe we should go straight into the departments. Mr. Blumenfield?
Yeah,
go right ahead.
One question about the
Yeah, please.
overall,
I think the point we're making in this report is that because we have already expended the $17 million that we had previously set aside in the unappropriated balance for potential shortfalls, that the options for offsetting the remaining deficit are becoming more limited. So as part of that option, everything is on the table. As part of the mid-year, we will be looking at any general fund surpluses that can be swept to offset the citywide deficit. During the budget process, the mayor and council instructed that should departments report shortfalls, we would disclose them in the FSR, and that reinstitution of the managed hiring process was possible. So this recommendation of basically looking at possibly a modified version of managed hiring is consistent with that action that mayor and council took. But what we're saying is we're not defining that process right now, but we're putting everything on the table so that we can mitigate that shortfall by year end. In the first FSR, we did indicate that we would try to, that both police and fire were departments that were identifying shortfalls. We put those departments on notice as the possibility that we would reinstitute managed hiring for those departments. We have not recommended managed hiring at this time. We're just calling it out as a possibility.
Just to clarify, it's because it's being those deficits were being driven by the sworn side of the house, if you will, on both sides for both police and fire, that we felt instituting a managed hiring. When the council and mayor have certain goals tied to police hiring, police officer hiring, and firefighter hiring, that it would be counterintuitive or counter to that goal to institute any type of hiring, managed hiring process on the sworn side, and in essence try to fill the budget gap on the civilian side. It just it would, in essence, would be unfair.
because we're with it being caused by Constitution. I think is what you're
That's
saying.
right.
So it's sort of out there as this possibility, but we're really not. Okay.
Could I just,
Yeah.
I wanted to add on the fire thing. I think it's, I'm glad you're not putting the fire department in managed hiring jail, because I actually think it's even incorrect to say that they're running a deficit, because there's two areas that we did not properly budget for that they are obligated to pay for. Unused sick time, which we knew they were going to need because of the folks exiting the drop program. That's $2.7 million a year. Sworn constant staffing, which is required under the Fair Labor Standards Act, that's $7.6 million. That's a total of $10.3 million that we knew they were going to have to spend, and it's more than the deficit they actually are running. So I don't even think it's fair to say that they're running a deficit, because none of this is surprising.
And along those lines, we are faced with that awkward position right now of wanting to staff up and yet still facing projected deficits even for this year. We just talked about the savings that we're going to realize for the long term, how this is changing our mindset for budgeting. We're on the precipice of hiring thousands of new people, and yet we're still dealing with the lingering deficits that are the the legacy of prior years. And so that does make it a challenge for all of our departments. But I do want to note that since the last FSR, one of the important points of the overview, I think, is both police and fire have made significant progress since the last FSR in erasing their reducing their projected year-end deficits. So that's good. In fact, I think almost all the departments that were facing projected deficits have brought those numbers down or eliminated them. And yet we're still looking at a 97 year-end projected deficit. Now that's going to fluctuate still some more, but we still have plenty of work to do. Most of the negative, in fact, the entirety of the losses that we've suffered, it's the wrong word, I can't think of the word, but the step back that we've taken since the last FSR is entirely due to liability on the part of the city. So unanticipated liabilities. So just so you know, members, I introduced a motion last week to ask every general manager of non-proprietary departments to analyze their potential liability reduction and look at what their history of liability has been, to make recommendations about ways that they can reduce their risk and liability, and also asking for the city attorney to report back on the last 10 years of liability payouts, settlements, claims, broken down by liability area, so that we can start to see where the trend lines are and address these. I know some of this is due to very large, cases, and there's always going to be wild fluctuations. But I think overall, this is one of the areas that we can really have an impact on long-term obligations on the part of the city and help to reduce that deficit. But the story of this FSR is city liability, and we got to get a handle.
Weren't as great as we had before.
The 97 million is the expenditure shortfall. And the 97 million, yes, a large portion is the liability claims account shortfall. There's also a $2 million shortfall in the attorney conflicts panel fund, and that's contributing to the increases. As far as revenue is concerned, we are not making any revenue adjustments at this time. We are reporting that the projected revenue shortfall has decreased, but it is still too early in the fiscal year to assess, and no modifications are being made at this time. The 97 is exclusively on the expenditure side. It does not account for any revenue shortfall.
But that's actually, the way you said it is good, so that
No.
I put a lot of negatives in there.
Well,
We're making more money as a city, but we're not taking advantage of
Well, actually, we are, in some cases, we are tracking lower than budgeted revenues. But what we're saying is that we don't want to make any adjustments at this time, even though we're tracking lower than anticipated in some areas, because a good portion of our more robust revenues, if you will, like property tax and business tax, don't come into our cash flows until the second part of the fiscal year. So as opposed to making dramatic changes to our revenue budget because we're seeing the utility tax down a bit or some other tax down, we want to hold off until we get better numbers on property tax, better numbers on business tax, and then in the mid-year would be the most likely scenario where we would be making some type of revenue adjustments.
And that's because it's such a small projection on the
Yeah,
time frame.
exactly.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Anything else, members? All right.
Not on this part.
Okay, thank you very much. Why don't we go ahead and start with LAPD, and then we'll go to fire, and then we'll go to the other departments. Mr. Kretz, you want to start us off with PD?
Sure. It looks like the main reason the department deficit isn't as bad as we thought is that we're actually having trouble keeping up with our high rate of attrition and hiring enough positions. So 2 questions. One, is there a way to more accurately forecast our personnel needs? And 2, is there anything we can do to keep up more with the vacancies?
Are you referring to sworn or civilian?
Only sworn.
Sworn?
Yeah.
Okay. I know that the folks on the personnel side and recruitment are working very closely with the personnel department to try to get as many people through and to be able to hire up and to keep up with attrition. I think there's a lot of competition out there with other agencies that are also hiring, and so it's been a struggle, but they're working hard on it. I'm not sure.
Anything we could be doing that we're not doing?
I know that they're doing a lot more outreach. I think that that we're working with personnel, like I said, with personnel going out and doing a lot more job fairs and working with the military in other jurisdictions that may have groups of people that might be interested in moving down to Los Angeles to become police officers. But I know they're working very hard.
We're working with high schools and colleges.
I'm not sure. I can get back to you on that and let you know.
That would be great. And
Okay.
in general, any better ways that we can more accurately forecast the department and the department's budget?
More accurately forecast the department's budget?
Yeah.
In what respect? I'm sorry.
Well, it usually
Actually,
winds
I
up
think
not being
the
too
fact
close
that we're
to
only projecting
the projected
a
numbers.
$3 million deficit in a budget of over $1 billion is pretty. We've achieved a lot over the last couple budget cycles to get the department to a more accurate reflection of what they actually spend. So if you recall, for overtime, police overtime, we went through a very drawn out process of making sure we budgeted a number that's closer to the number of hours that police officers are using for overtime. So it's not, we knew what the number was, it's just we didn't have the resources to budget accordingly, and now we're pretty much, I think, close to where we need to be based on our review.
Well, it seems like this year we tripped over it because we weren't able to hire as adequately as we could have. If we had hired the number of people that we intended to, we probably would have been very short. So we had two problems that worked together and worked out okay for one short period of time. But just in general, I've been concerned, one, the budget is usually far off, and two, I don't mind in the short term that we're hiring a little less, but if this is a trend that continues, we could have suddenly find ourselves with a unnecessarily small department.
And that actually is true. But if you recall, we also made some policy targets as far as funding levels for overtime that will increase going into next fiscal year and the year after. So when we talked about the overtime issue, we knew we weren't going to be able to solve it on one budget cycle. It's going to take a couple of different budget cycles, and so it was a commitment that was made this last budget cycle that this year we would increase it by so much, but it was going to increase additionally by another I think 10 to 5 million.
I don't know if it's avoidable or not, but is there a big difference, or is that not a big piece of the overall hiring?
No, what had occurred is in the budget, the way it was planned is that most of the hiring would be in the second half of the year, which saves some money. But in reality, in order for us to be able to have the kind of continuity we need in terms of recruitment and hiring, also to be able to keep up with attrition, we needed to have classes more evenly distributed throughout the full year. We couldn't have classes of 60 or 70 or 80 in the second half of the year if we were going to try to keep up with attrition. So we had to start hiring at the very beginning of the year, which costs more because people are on the payroll longer.
It's just a matter of how long they're on the payroll, not economies of scale with these classes. Is it really the per person doing small versus larger?
No, that doesn't change in terms of the cost to train. It's the impact on our payroll.
And since we want to get them on board as fast as possible, we
Right,
have to
right.
ignore that cost.
Right, exactly.
Got it.
Well, just to follow up on that point, this discussion about class size has been going on since long before I was on the
Right.
council. I was listening to budget and finance debates about class size of LAPD recruiting classes years and years ago. And I had always understood, or in recent years I've understood, that there is an optimal size of a class for cost efficiency. And I think it's around
40 to 50.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's
it seems to me that the most important goal is achieving cost efficiency rather than keeping up with attrition in mid-year. If we're keeping up with attrition over the course of a year, understand a worthy goal, but it sounds to me like what you're saying is we want to keep up with attrition on a quarterly or monthly basis.
No, it's not. The 40 to 50 is not a cost efficiency. It has to do with having the optimal number of people in the class, the number of trainers, the continuity of having X number of trainers up at training division. So they're working in cycles through with the classes. So it's that kind of efficiency that we're talking about in having an optimal number of 40 to 50 people, and the ratios that they need for trainer to trainees and all that sort of thing. You're right. There have been the way we do our hiring has been played with for years, and what has happened is, in an effort to save money, they push the hiring to the second half of the year to keep people off payroll, but it has other impacts in terms of recruitment, slowing down that machine, and also having very large classes at the second half of the year, which is not the most optimal way of training a group of people. If you have a class of 70 or 80, that's problematic, whereas you're not getting the right ratios that you need if you were going to have at 40 or 50. It's a better, more manageable group of people. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
But conversely, if you have smaller classes, then you're not achieving cost efficiencies because you have to have your trainers on the payroll, and they're going to be on the payroll throughout the year regardless.
Right.
Right.
But that's a soft cost that we have the trainers, because there are.
All right.
Just thinking that per trainee,
Yes, there is a per person cost.
and is that and that varies by like less than 5% depending on how the class size is.
We did it. When we do the calculation of the per person, we do it based on an average class size, and it's fluctuated. So most recently, we've been doing it, I think, as an average class size of 50. So we don't do it per class to figure that out, but it is more cost effective intuitively to have a bigger group of people because it's spread.
Just hearing different things. I just was trying
Yeah,
to
but it's
quantify what
different.
you were saying, which is that it's not really the cost. It's not really about the training's class size. There's an optimum level. I'm assuming that the cost per pupil only varies by less than 5%.
Yeah.
It
wouldn't be that much.
Not significant, whatever the class size is.
Correct.
That's what I'm confirming that I'm.
Yes.
Which is different than what you understood and what I used to understand it as well. But, okay, great. Thank you.
I just wanted to add that in terms of the number of, or the shortfall in hiring, it's relatively minor. It's 14 positions. Their planned hiring was 177 and they hired 163. So just to keep that in context.
PD members, thank you very much. So let's go ahead and bring up fire next, and we'll start with Mr. Bonin.
Did I call fire?
According to my notes.
Okay.
Change your mind, that's okay.
No, I mean, some of this may be from item 7. I think that's what I was thinking of, but I can ask it. The questions are the same. They're relevant for both, I guess. Good afternoon, everybody. I had a question on the number of vacancies. The report lists that there are 270 sworn field vacancies as of July 2015. And I wanted to ask about that because a few months ago, it might have been the last FSR, the number that we were discussing wasn't correct. I know I have this document from the fire department from a few months ago which projected that there'd be 326 vacancies as of June 30th. And I'm wondering which of those numbers is correct.
Emilio Rodriguez, Fire Department. As of our last reporting period, the 275 should be correct. That includes field vacancies, including positions that are actually, vacant, not filled, in addition to constant staffing vacancies as a result of time taken off, injury on duty, vacation, etc.
Well, I'm confused why we were told just a few months ago it was 327. Because a lot of this is predictable because of drop.
Right. I'd have to go back to the information and look at that, sir.
June, do you have anything?
I'm sorry, Councilman, can you repeat that question?
Yeah, a few months ago in committee we had been trying to drill down on how many vacancies there were going to be in the department. And just a few months ago we were projecting, LAFD was projecting there'd be 326 vacancies as of June 30th. And what we're hearing today is that there's significantly fewer. And I'm confused about why that is, given that the numbers of vacancies would have been fairly predictable given the drop program.
To be honest, I'm not sure where that information is, because in the next item that I'm going to be discussing in terms of the 6th recruit class, the report that we had generated in October, we were projecting that there were going to be 289 vacancies as of the end of June. So it's our planning division that does the staffing projections, and so I'm not sure in terms of the particulars of the 327 that was projected based on the report that you're looking at.
Okay, this was information from the department just a couple months ago. I'm just making sure we're not understating the problem with vacancies and with attrition.
Yeah, I'm not able to comment on that document, but certainly I'll go back to the department and inquire in terms of what the discrepancy is based upon.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right.
Anything else? All right. Thank you very much. So let's go next to DOT.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to ask whomever is representing DOT, parking enforcement seems to be lagging in terms of revenue. And I'm wondering if the department has analyzed why this is, what you've determined, and if there's any plan to respond to that.
Good afternoon, Brian Hale, Deputy Chief. Sorry, could you repeat the question, Councilman?
The question is, we seem to be down on parking revenues. Why is that? Do we have any plans to address it, et cetera?
I think the primary and predominant reason for that is our staffing. We are under positions in terms of our full-time traffic officers, about 30 positions. And we've encountered attrition just like some of the other city departments, whether it be through retirement, but of course as the economy has picked up, other city departments have hired. We've lost, just within our own department, 8 went over to transportation engineer associates. We've lost people to DWP as well as to detention officer positions. So one of the things we have been able to do is to backfill and with our part-time officer program, but we're also down there as well, approximately 20 positions. So we are making efforts. Currently we have interviews scheduled to transition. As you know, we transition our part-time officers into full-time positions, so we have interviews scheduled, and we expect to transition later this month 30 officers to full-time positions. And next month we have an exam scheduled to be released for the part-time officer program, which we'll be able to hire additional from those ranks.
Now, these positions are all at least revenue neutral, right? We don't lose money when we hire traffic officers and part-time traffic officers.
That's correct.
So, well, I've probably been making this point for 5 years, but we should try hard to stay staffed up in these positions. There's no value to being under the numbers. We don't actually save by hiring fewer officers. So I don't know what we can do to move that up. We never seem to be quite caught up in this department.
Well, one of the things we've asked for in this upcoming next budget is to overhire. My understanding is we have overhired a small percentage of officers, so wherein we're authorized for a complement of 585 currently, we want to be able to go up to 600 because we're anticipating ongoing attrition as we've had, as well as some of the officers are out on extended absence on a state rate, so there's some salary savings to be realized there as well. We've certainly been actively working with our HR staff, and that's one of the things that we've had some issue with. You know, they're understaffed as well in terms of their ability to get these exams, get these people moved into these positions that we have vacancies, and there's vacancies throughout the offices, so we're one unit, one division within the department that is actively seeking to fill those vacancies, but they are hard at work in trying to fulfill all the various requests that they have on their desk.
No, I think that would be great because I think a lot of this is very predictable. We're consistently behind, so if you overhire, I think you'll still wind up a little short, but you'll be a lot closer to full coverage for the year. So I'm glad to hear that.
We appreciate that, your support.
Thanks. Just sort of following up on what Mr. Corrett said, love to see you guys staff up more, although not particularly to bring in more parking revenue, but to see you guys doing more traffic control at key intersections. I think that's extremely valuable and looking forward to getting us there. Had a question for the department about the speed hump program. In this year's budget, we allocated a small amount of money to start restoring the speed hump program, and I'm just wondering, have we filled those positions yet, and what are we doing?
Angela Baruman, LADOT. The position that was provided in the current year, we are currently in the process of filling that position right now. So we hope to by the end of the fiscal year.
Okay. What do we anticipate being the result? There's only one position?
Yes, one position.
And what do we anticipate being the result of that person being hired?
The department hopes that this person can put together and articulate the policy, set the policy.
Okay. I could have done that for free, but all right. Thanks.
Yeah, just one quick question. Since our last FSR discussion, the question of upgrading the department's truck fleet has come up a couple times, including modifying some vehicles to provide cooler conditions for animals. Is this cost accounted for in the animal services budget or general services? And if not, how can we expect to see it handled?
Felicia from the CEO's office. I am not aware that the cost is included in the animal service budget, but I would need to get back to you on that.
We could report back on whether or not that expense was part of what's being calculated here in the FSR.
It's an ongoing problem, and if it isn't included, hopefully it will be in time for the start of hot weather at the beginning of summer at the end of this fiscal year. And that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Afternoon. I have a question.
Sure.
Could you use an extra 7 positions?
Sorry?
Mr. Kratz, why don't you go ahead? Well, I'm going to move that we add the 7 positions that were proposed as part of the coalition workforce contract and workforce development program. As we discussed earlier, we add an additional 7 positions for personnel as part of this FSR.
And if you need a second, I would be delighted.
I do, and thank you. Any other questions besides that, Mr. Kratz?
That was my primary, and I know we provided some money to fill some additional positions to catch up on some of our exams, etc. Have we hired everybody, and how are we doing on the exams?
All of those positions that were graciously given last fiscal year have been filled, and we are on target to meet our goal of continually reducing the backlog. We're still working on our other goal, which was to get every exam open within 30 days, and that's still something that we're working on.
And hopefully the extra 7 positions staffing our new needs adequately will also help not back you up further on some of those other activities.
Yes, these will support the workforce restoration, and they support other aspects of the hiring process that aren't part of examining, specifically in the classification area, as well as in the liaison services, which is actually helping the departments get the folks on board.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to further define those positions, Mr. Sahab, before we get to the vote on this. But did you want to?
No, I was just scrambling to find out where those 7 positions were identified. Clearly, they weren't in our FSR.
It's the December 2nd memo from Mr. Santana on page 13. 3 new positions for 3 positions in personnel, 2 in the CAO. Where are the other 2?
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Anything else for personnel members?
No.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right, and that brings up next housing.
Good afternoon. I'm Laura Guglielmo with the Housing and Community Investment Department.
I'm Nick Campbell with the CAO.
Good afternoon. Mr. Kretz.
Yeah, just a short question. I think there's a projected deficit of around $8 million. Is there any preliminary insight as to what's causing that deficit?
The shortfall you're referring to refers to the related cost reimbursement to the general fund from housing special funds. The Housing and Community Investment Department is primarily funded through grants and fees, and the related costs associated with those positions is reimbursed to the general fund. We currently have we've had a consistent vacancy rate of about 15%, and we are not able to reimburse the general fund the related costs for positions that are not filled. So the managed hiring committee, or the managed hiring process, has its goal is to delay hiring to save costs. When it comes to special funded positions, however, it hurts the general fund to delay that hiring. And we have been working with personnel and hiring as many people as we can since that managed hiring process has ended, but we have continued to keep a vacancy rate of about 15%. Our budget assumes a 5%.
So you're working to correct that as best as you can.
We are trying to fill as many positions as possible, which would have a benefit to the general fund. However, I will note that if we don't fill a position, the general fund is not incurring the costs associated with that position, which is the intended payback. So then either way it might offset to some degree. It's a wash, except for when you just look at your revenue projections. Your revenue projections are looking like they are less than they should be. But we are not able to pay for employees that aren't on payroll. It would be a violation of those special funds, those grants.
So it's more of a wash rather than...
It's a wash in terms of the cost to the city, yes.
Okay.
And I just want to say that the managed hiring is no longer in place. And even last year for special funded departments, many of those positions were exempted from the managed hiring process to a great extent. Really what's happening now is that now that everybody's in the hiring mode, it's really the hiring process through personnel and through exams that is delaying a lot of the filling of positions, whether they're general fund or special funded positions. So, the positions that personnel is going to be receiving, the additional focus on hiring will hopefully resolve some of those issues.
Yeah, we're obviously catching up to some degree, but we're not quite there yet.
Exactly.
Very good. Thank you.
With the same issues, so I'll bring it up and you can support me on it.
Family Source Center?
Yes. Yeah. So during the first FSR, as you know, the council, by unanimous vote, directed that the CAO identify funding, not come up with recommendations of why these two family source centers should not be funded, but to come up with funding. And so I'm concerned that I'm not seeing that here.
I can explain. The department is in the process of an RFP for the family source system, looking for providers throughout the city. The family source system and the centers that they support that. Right now we have 16 family source centers throughout the city of Los Angeles that are managed through community-based nonprofit organizations. The RFP that is on the street, or that we're currently evaluating, assumes those same 16 centers based on, I shouldn't say the same. We did a poverty analysis because these centers, they are funded through CDBG and CSBG primarily, and they are required to serve low-income communities. So we do a poverty analysis across the census tracts to determine the highest concentrations of low-income individuals and families throughout the city of Los Angeles. And there are certain parts of the city where there are higher areas, and there are certain parts of the city where there are lower areas, but there is poverty throughout our city. We do have proposals for 16 areas throughout the city, and we are proposing funding at $800,000 per center. If our recommendations will be going to the Community Action Board in the next few weeks, and then to council after that. If the council and the mayor wish to fund all 16 centers, which we recommend, we project an annual shortfall of about $2.9 million, which is actually 3 centers, not 2. But we did approach your offices that had the lowest areas of poverty, that we were concerned that if there wasn't any additional funding, that those would be the areas of lowest poverty in the city would need to be eliminated. So we have talked to the CAO about the shortfall in the current fiscal year, because the funding begins April 1st, that we would have a 3-month shortfall if all 16 were funded at the $800,000 recommended, and if we receive the same CDBG and CSBG grant funds that we receive in the current year, the gap would be $2.9 million for a year, or about $675,000 for the 3 months from April through June. However, the council has not acted on that recommendation yet. So we thought it was premature to ask for it now, but we've talked to the CAO's office and we let them know what the scope of the issue is, and it will be dependent upon the council's action and the mayor's decision about funding in the budget, but that's what we would project. And the Housing Community Investment Department has requested that gap funding in our budget as our number 1 priority for next fiscal year as well. So we want you to know that we fully support the family source centers in all of the areas in the city that have concentrations of poverty that make sense.
I guess I'll say I'm always concerned about the way that formula is applied, because you have, just thinking from the West Valley perspective, you have some.
Absolutely.
But because they're surrounded by some other census tracts, they don't win on that formula. And then what ends up happening is you have a whole swath of people who live, west of 405 that have no access, to any family source center, whereas in other areas you might have multiple family source centers and you can get folks to go. There's no sort of geographic weighting on this in terms of people and their access to a family source center. So that concerns me overall, but that's probably another battle.
It just has to do with concentration. You're right, there is an impact. It is based on the population, but there are, what you're referring to is that there are fewer options for people in people in poverty in certain parts of the city than for other parts of the city, because there are fewer people in poverty in those neighborhoods. Not that there are no people in poverty.
And it may not even be absolute numbers, but you're talking about if you block that to the west, it has the appearance of being a smaller pocket, but the actual numbers of people is very real and is a large number compared to even some of the other sites. But
I absolutely agree with you.
The concentration issue, they have to, go so far to get service that they're just not going to get the service.
Well, I think, there's a tremendous attention in this city and the city council on homelessness and ways to prevent homelessness. And it's really important for the policymakers to understand that the family source centers and the family source system are very often families' lifeline to avoid homelessness. They're really critical services. There's a tremendous return on investment on those services. The impact on the individuals and families that are served and their surrounding communities is measured and is astounding. So we appreciate your support for the system, and we're just trying to find the money, right, Nick?
No, I get that. It's obviously why I keep raising this issue and why the council gets it, because that's why we had that unanimous vote.
So I want to underscore everything Mr. and say ditto to everything Mr. Blumenfield said. It's some people who are poor are being punished because their neighbors are not, effectively.
Correct.
Is what happens. And these two facilities are at risk. I'm still unclear on how we can fix the problem. My reading of what the CAO's report said, the FSR, was that the contracts are going to expire at the end of March.
The current agreements expire, the contracts end the end of March. We're in the process of recommending, those are 5-year contracts.
Right.
So the end of the 5-year program ends in March. We'll be coming to this council, the plan was actually to come in December, but we're looking like January now, back to the council with recommendations for the proposed contractors for beginning April.
So that will come to us before the end of March?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
We expect that will come to you. Like I said, we had originally planned that it came to you in December.
Okay.
We're a little bit behind. We have to go to the Community Action Board first, but it should come to you in as early in January as we can. We desperately need to maintain the services for these communities.
Okay, because I was concerned because I knew the contracts were expiring at the end of March, and I see in the FSR, CAO is saying it's recommended that funding be addressed as part of the city's annual budget process, which would be months after they had shut down, and once they're shut down, they ain't reopening.
Well, that's true. However, there is the budget process begins in June, and the funding, because these are the grant funding for these centers ends in March as well. So there'll be a new funding allocation in April. But the current year allocation, if you were to fund 16 centers at $800,000 as we recommend, then the shortfall in the current fiscal year would be $675,000,
right,
which would have to come from the general fund.
Right.
And those funds would need to be identified in a later.
Right.
It's not needed immediately.
What I'm trying to get at is I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to discuss this and vote on this before the current contracts end and two of the facilities are shut down. So what precisely is the process? Does that report come from HCID to Housing Committee, to this committee, to both committees? And
It first goes to the Community Action Board, which the City Council does have representatives on that board. It will then go to the Housing Committee. And I don't believe it comes to this committee unless that's directed. But
if it's a general fund hit, it will.
For the general fund, yeah, if there's going to be a general fund hit, then it would come. Usually it goes to the Policy Committee before it comes to the Budget and Finance Committee. And then it would go to the full council for a vote.
Having heard that, Mr. CAO, can you give us a sense of when it would be in council?
Sure. So if it occurs in January, then it's typically going to happen late January or in February. It's in particular with the March deadlines, what we would want to know is if it's going to have a general fund impact. So if the council is going to request that whatever shortfall is made up through the general fund, then it would come to this committee. In which case, what we would most likely recommend is after you prioritize whether or not this is something you want to fund this year, is only look to fund what's needed this fiscal year, which is why the budget for 16-17 comes into play, and which is what we're referring to in this report, is that you would fund only what's needed to get us through the end of this fiscal year, and then as part of the next budget, you would appropriate the balance for those centers.
I understand.
Okay.
One more CAO report that was talk about how there must be some on the federal dollars, some supplantation. If we spend general fund dollars on it, does that then prevent us from in future years getting grant money for that same contract, or how does that work? Or are we?
That is usually the risk. I'm not saying that it's would happen, but that's typically the something that we've been notified in years past is that, and not just federal but also state, is whenever you use city general fund dollars for any purpose, you can't necessarily then switch it over to some type of federal or state grant.
We need to be very clear about where the general fund portion of the allocation, what it will be used to fund. So if you decide, we would recommend that you identify that for the areas of lowest poverty, because then they would be, it protects your allocation for future years, I think, in a better way. But we can discuss that when you're looking at this specifically. But you'll want to be clear about how you use your general fund allocation, because that documentation, that record keeping, is going to help keep us clear with our grantors that the general fund was used for a specific purpose, and therefore in the future we can be careful not to run into supplantation issues.
Right, or maybe there's another creative way to use, be in danger of losing,
right,
something to that effect. But
yeah, we just need to be careful about how we allocate it.
But some of those creative ideas may take a little running time, a little running room to make happen, so that we don't run into a situation down the road where if we had only taken, set up a new fund now, or contracted with a nonprofit or something like that could have insulated us from the problem.
I'm sure we'll be happy to work together to figure out a way to ensure we don't have supplantation issues.
Thank you.
And I can do the LASA either under this item or under the homeless item. It's same questions.
Why don't we start now? Because I think I'm going
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How you guys doing? Wanted to ask a couple questions about the recommended funding priorities. I actually agree with the priorities. Just had a couple questions on them. I mean, it should be noted this is really a drop in the bucket. Even frankly, if we get to 100 million, that's a drop in the bucket compared to what New York and San Francisco are doing. But I think the priorities the mayor laid out are smart ones, particularly the rapid rehousing money, I was very glad to see, and the allocations for the winter shelter. I had a question first on the winter shelter allocation. Specifically, what does this additional money get us for winter shelter?
Hello, Stuart Jackson, interim CFO for LASA. The additional funding for the winter shelter program enables us to add 440 beds to the winter shelter program in the city of Los Angeles. Currently, the program funds a little over 800 beds, and this funding allows us to increase it by 440 beds.
And that is all at different new facilities or spread out through the existing ones?
Spread out through the existing facilities.
Okay. Does any of that money, did that get us the extra month of opening early?
That motion was approved by City Council. I think it was in October.
So that was a separate pool of money?
That was a separate motion.
Separate pool of money?
A separate pool of money.
Okay. Under either that source of money or this source of money, does either of them get us the ability, as the council had stated as its intention, to open shelters during the day during El Nino rains?
Yes, it does. It provides funding for 24 operations for 21 days, estimated 21 days.
And what happens if we hit 21 days before the end of January? Entirely possible.
We will...
Chris Calandrillo, Director of Programs at LASA. We would come back and probably ask for additional funding.
Okay.
There is no crystal ball to know how many days we needed, so 21 is a stab at it.
Well, so we did look at historical El Nino years and how many 24-hour rainy days there were, and it was someplace around 21.
Okay, so we're having really serious weather forecasts. Some folks are preparing for a 1,000-year storm, not a 100-year storm. There's been serious concern about how that could cause a loss of life. By adding 440 beds, we still get to what, 1,200 beds?
Yes.
And there's, by most estimates, 19,000 people sleeping on the streets of Los Angeles every night. If, during the course of El Nino, this body decides, as a result of our previous declaration of shelter crisis, that we should or need to open up rec centers or other places for folks to seek shelter in the middle of torrential rains to save their lives, how much will that cost us? Has LASA begun to think about that?
So we've begun that work in conversation with the county at this point, and they've identified 7 rec centers, 7 sites throughout the county that they would like to operate on a weather-activated basis, is what we're calling it. So within 24 hours to 72 hours, we could start up that site and have it available. We could do the same thing in the city. We haven't gone through the exact line item budget on it, so we could come back and talk to you about what that would cost to be able to do that once we have a better understanding what the county side will be. So we're doing that currently with the county, and we could bring that information.
And those are 7 county facilities, or they're identified?
There are 7 counties.
So that's just the county part. I mean, I really have no county areas in my area, so I have a very large population of homeless. We'd need to do something in addition to that.
Correct. I'm saying that we could do that.
Right.
We could bring you the numbers.
Okay. All right.
As when they're developed, which would be in the next week or so.
Okay.
We have a meeting with the county on Thursday to discuss this.
Having heard that, I have a question on another aspect of this, but having heard that, Mr. Chair, my understanding is a total of $15 million was approved in the first FSR for this account, and we have a total of about $13 million being spent through these through these items today.
I did hear the last sentence.
We have about a total of $13 million that's being allocated as a result of this. I'd recommend that we set aside that other $2 million for emergency El Nino shelter provisions in case we get stuck with weather, so we don't need to come back and scramble and take another action.
So I think by default, it remains set aside in the homeless account, and if we don't appropriate it otherwise now, it will, or for some other priority that gets recommended by the policy committee, it would be there.
Okay, great.
And we would be able to fall back on that money in the event that we need more days.
Okay, all right. Then I'm fine, because we could do that as an emergency action of the council if necessary.
Yep.
Okay. Then I wanted to ask a question about the $1 million allocated for technology. If you could just explain to me a little bit more. That's a lot for technology. What that exactly is going to go for?
Sure. There are sort of 3 elements to the technology component. So one is the most simple is to buy tablets for outreach workers so they can access assessments and enter data in the field. In looking at what's needed for outreach workers in the field, sort of the robust, rugged type of tablet that they would need, we came up with a cost estimate of about $1,600 per tablet. It sounds high. So $1,600, you can get 280 of them for $450,000, which also sounds high. 280 is just over the amount of personnel in the city that we're estimating needing within the coordinated entry system for outreach, engagement, and navigation. So we are open to discussion around the number.
Tell me about what. I'm not going to dispute the number, and I'm certainly not going to dispute the need. I think it's a perfectly smart investment. I want to question the type of hardware. I've had this issue for 2.5 years with the fire department, where they love to invest in tough books, which are definitely heavy duty, but it's sort of a frozen in time technology where you can't add new technology, you can't add new software, can't add new apps. The personnel don't particularly like it. You can get some pretty decent heavy duty cases for a regular tablet that costs a lot less than $1,600 per. So tell me what exactly you're looking at and why we're not looking at something that's a lot less expensive.
The estimate came from our IT department at LASA, so I can't quite break it down for you. This is what they suggest for our outreach workers, for the ERT workers at LASA. So they rolled this into this request.
I don't want to hold this up, so yeah. I won't, but I do, before this comes to council, the actual expenditures, I want to have more conversations because I don't think you guys are on the right track on that one.
There was a conversation both with the mayor's office and with several city council district offices of potentially delaying this piece of the action, and we could come back with more information and a better proposal for what that would look like.
The component of the technology funding that's dedicated to this expenditure is in the neighborhood, just a little under $500,000. Right. And we had the same thoughts as you just suggested, Mr. Bonnet. So I think clearly the need, understandable, but I think we'd like to get a more detailed report back on a plan for this. So I'm going to suggest that component, that $500,000, gets pulled out of the recommendation for now, and then we can revisit it after we have
that makes sense. And then my last question was on the $100,000 for the facilities evaluation. What exactly is that $100,000 paying for?
Do you want to do that?
So the facility evaluation is a multi-component project as well. It looks at access centers throughout the city of Los Angeles, as well as sanitation facilities, restrooms, showers, as well as storage facilities to address 5611, and potential space for vehicles to park at night. So there's a number of elements, a number of factors that need to be considered in what that's going to look like throughout the city.
I get all that. What's the $100,000 paying for? Is this a staff person?
To do the research, yes, to do the evaluation and put together.
Is that one or two staff people?
It'll probably be around 1.5 staff person. We're looking at either internal staff or bringing in a consultant to do this actual
So we're in sort of a crisis. How fast can you guys get that person on board?
We started the process. We plan on having them on board by January.
By January. And when do you anticipate they will have recommendations?
So, excuse me, in our conversations, we're potentially staging the rollout. So we could have 2 recommendations before June. So I would say April or May is our expectation, based on what currently exists, right? We can take folks that have been projects that have been reallocated or otherwise lost funding and assess them for this need pretty quickly and bring them back to you as a proposal. To do it citywide is a larger question, right? So we would expect to bring that back in June.
That seems like a very long time. It seems like a very long time. In the meantime, are you asking social service agencies, council offices, folks on the ground to give you suggestions?
That is part of the project, yes.
Is that happening now?
It hasn't started yet, no.
I'd beg you to start doing it now, because we can't keep waiting.
Yes.
We can't keep waiting. I know for a comprehensive list, but I don't think we're going to wait to do any storage facility or any safe parking or any shelter anywhere until we have a comprehensive list. I'm imagining some things will start before June. I'm hoping.
Great. And that's our hope as well. We would love to bring you what we find early and then move from there.
Thank you.
Mr. Kretz.
Yeah, just one quick follow-up, and it's so intuitive it probably doesn't need to be said, but just in case people aren't thinking about it, there are a lot of city facilities like park buildings that could be used as shelters, but those that are either below level or are level, which most of those buildings are, I would think would be locations that should be excluded from consideration. And we should be looking at places that have at least a couple feet of location for the water in case this winds up being a 50-year flood. It still probably won't be a flood with all the opportunities we have. I mean, it won't be a 20-foot flood, but certainly we could have a foot high of water covering the whole area, and you wouldn't want to be in buildings that you had to quickly abandon for better situated buildings. So hopefully we'll look for those with the highest level above ground as our top priority for these emergency shelters that go beyond the 1,200.
Mr. Blumenfield.
Just to follow up on the technology upgrade issue, was the money that was in there was literally just for the hardware of the tablets, or was it also corresponding software, getting the documents online with that particular format?
So the $450,000 in that item was for the tablets and the software.
And the software.
Yeah.
So that's why. So which tablet you get will determine what software you use.
Sure. Yes.
So I guess one thing I would look for is software that can be used on other tablets as well, whether it's an iPad or something, so that if you do need to scale up at some point, we don't need to keep, people could use regular iPads and use the software. To me, the software is much more important than the hardware.
Yep.
Because everybody has a smartphone or an iPad or something that they could use, and granted, you have to give to lots of workers. But I don't want to see us get caught in this proprietary issue where we have our own unique tablet that has our own unique software that you can't put on your iPhone or your iPad.
And the intent of the field-based tablets is so that folks can access HMIS, which is the Homeless Management Information System, so our database system, and enter information and assess people for their needs within the HMIS system in the field. So it's not a proprietary, the goal isn't proprietary, and HMIS is accessible as a web-based application.
On any web-based.
Yeah. So the software needs are pretty minimal.
And you're working with ITA on this as well?
We are not currently. I don't know what our access to that is. We're working with our own IT department at LASA.
Well, I guess I'd ask that you work with ITA as well, because we've talked about this in Technology Committee, and in fact, this certainly could come through the Tech Committee as well. And I'd like to get ITA's take on it, because they're able to work with all the other departments to try to.
Just to that, LASA is actually not technically within the realm of the city's technology. So ITA is not their service provider, so to speak.
But we can authorize ITA to work with them. Right.
But that just means that ITA will have to absorb that work along the line as what they normally current capacity. They already have capacity issues as it is.
This kind of thing has come up in the various departments through the Tech Committee, with the fire department, pattern and practice of working with them. And on the Innovation Fund, we sent back a tablet request, and they were able to get it down substantially. So there's a level of expertise that we've already had this issue come up in multiple departments. So at least on a consulting basis, I'd like to see them engaged in this in somehow. It doesn't need to be
Members? Okay, so just on this point then, as I mentioned, if there's no objection, and it sounds like there's no objection from LASA either, we'll go ahead and reduce the technology upgrade allocation here by $450,000, the amount of the tablet program. We'll ask LASA to report back with a more detailed discussion of that budget and its utilization.
And consult with ITA.
And would you like that to be referred, that part to be referred to your committee as well?
Well, I don't want to slow it down.
Yeah, that's the thing. So,
because especially as we get close to the end
as well. And then that would reduce the total amount from the UB to 12.45 million then as well. So we'd have to amend recommendations number 10 and 11 accordingly. So recommendation number 10 would be reduced by $450,000 on the line item for technology upgrade. Recommendation number 11 regarding the city contracts to the tablets. Also, members, thank you all very much. Also, members, just to clarify on the personnel positions, as there was Mr. Kretz's motion with regard to the collective bargaining agreement report was well taken, and we all approved that. There was also, as part of that report, a recommendation by the CAO to add a senior personnel analyst 2, a senior personnel analyst 1, and a personnel analyst 2 to personnel's budget. Those 3 positions.
Yes.
I have that right, Mr. Seha?
That's right.
And then 2 positions to the CAO.
That's correct.
Okay, so my motion then that I would like to add is to add an additional senior personnel analyst 2. No, I'm sorry. An additional senior personnel analyst 1, 3 additional personnel analyst 2s, and 3 senior clerk typists, as were requested by the personnel department in their new service request. So I would like to add those positions for a total then of 10 positions in personnel and 2 positions in the CAO. And then we'll additionally get the report back that Mr. Kretz requested to see if that measures up with the anticipated workload indicators and so forth.
And just for clarification purposes, in our report relative to the coalition agreement where we specified the 5 positions, we indicated that to the extent possible that these resolution positions would be absorbed with existing funding for both personnel and the CAO, and that if additional funding was required, that we would come back in the mid-year report, mid-year FSR, with requests for that funding.
Okay. Well, I'd like to go ahead and authorize those RAs right now, and I'd like to actually instruct the CAO to come back with funding recommendations to cover them. But I think it sounded to me like there was a wide consensus that there's a sense of urgent personnel, these positions, because it will open up the entire process that impacts all the other departments as well in terms of filling their positions. So, Mr. Kretz.
Well, as long as we're not looking at filling them from existing personnel resources, because then I think we're just spinning our wheels and essentially doing the same thing. So if we're talking about actually funding new positions, then I'm definitely on board with that.
So, the problem is that we haven't identified a source of funding for any of these positions, and so just to get the ball rolling, our suggestion was to get the positions authorized as resolution positions, and to the extent possible, if either department, whether it's our office or the personnel department, want to start, once those positions get duly allocated and so forth, if they want to fill those positions and they have salary savings for, from other parts of the office, that they could go ahead and fill those. And if there's additional funding that's required for the current fiscal year, that we would come back at whether it's a mid-year or something sooner with that request and with the identified source of funding.
Exactly. And that's so that the instruction is to approve these positions and to instruct the CAO to find the necessary funding to ensure.
Now, to be honest, with that motion made, I'm not sure if my report is as necessary, because
it's not. But we should have it, I think, anyway, because it might turn out that it's at your pleasure.
I think I'm going to withdraw that motion as long as this moves forward. I think.
Okay, very good. Anything further? So, with those amendments, any objections to any of those amendments, members? All right, then. I think I covered everything. With those amendments, seeing no objection, the CAO report relative to the second FSR is approved as amended. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, why don't we go ahead and go straight to item number 9 now, since we've been talking about that. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Members, I have to ask that we reconsider item number 5 because I did have 2 cards on it. So I'd like to call first Monica Alcaraz and Wayne Spindler. Sorry about that.
Do I just speak?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Monica Alcaraz. I'm president of the Highland Park Neighborhood Council. I'm also the CS coordinator for Northeast, and I'm also a volunteer with Recycle Resources for the Homeless, who is currently has a shelter opened up at All Saints Church that's located at 5619 Monte Vista Street. The site was identified in the motion for funding, and we just want to make sure that we're considered or that we're on the list for shelter. We had a great success. We've been open for 5 days. We started with 6 clients. We're up to 23. The goal is to have 30. Most of the people that are coming in are from along the Arroyo, which is the hardest area, I guess, for people. We have the support from the EGROC Neighborhood Council, Highland Park, Cypress Park, and Arroyo Seco. Both EGROC and Highland Park have given some funding. It's an all-volunteer-run organization right now, so it would be greatly appreciated if we could get funding for this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
One of the good subjects you mentioned was LAPD and not being able to recruit for these vacancies. Why is that so hard to get cops to be in the department? Well, at a commission meeting, me and another gentleman were arrested for unlawful dispersion and riot on November the 10th, and your website under Channel 35 blacks out the entire meeting on the video except for 35 seconds of the meeting. And I look on the website, and there's hundreds of pages of training that says that you cannot disperse a meeting unless there is a clear and present danger of 2 or more people assembled for a lawful purpose. So people don't want to work for the LAPD because they're not even trained in the basics of going to a meeting of the civilian commission that oversees them. That's why they don't want to be there.
All right. Now, members, if there's no objection, the FSR as amended is approved. All right, that brings us to item number 9.
Item number 9 is the motion Weezer, Harris, Austin, Bonin relative to the necessary authorities and instructions for the appropriation of $12.9 million in funds to the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority and subcontractors to implement various homeless programs as identified in the motion and the second financial status report.
Do we need to discuss this one or hear a report on this one, or are we good to go?
I move approval.
As amended in the same way that the FSR was
Yep.
amended.
Mr. Chair.
Yep. Oh,
Mr.
yep.
Chair, we have a card on that item.
I'm sorry.
And we have a card on that item.
You're right. Thank you. So there's no need for any further report on that, members? All right, then we want to hear from Mr. Spindler on that, and then we'll be ready to proceed. Item number 9.
What's bad is that there was a homeless committee meetings, and this money is supposed to be $100 million to combat homelessness, and it's being separated and segregated in all of these little fiefdoms. And that's the thing that I was afraid of, is that there's an ad hoc committee on homelessness. You should exclusively deal with that funding in that homeless committee and not anywhere else. Put the $100 million aside and spend the $100 million as the mayor promised. Because the $100 million is easily there, because just last week, the DWP authorized you a check for $265 million, and they filled all the trucks up with the cash last week and delivered it to Herb Wesson. So all you have to do, if you want to know where there's $265 extra million, Herb Wesson has it in his office here in the building, cash.
Does it even bear saying how ridiculous that is, or no? Okay. All right. So then let's go ahead and approve that motion without objection as amended. That brings us to item number 7.
Item number 7 is the CEO report relative to the requirements and costs to implement a 6th firefighter training class for paramedics only.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your patience.
Good afternoon. Ed Rose with the CIO's office. The report before you is a cover report from our office of a report from the fire department requesting funding for a 6th paramedic recruit class for the fire department. It would begin in February and would graduate in June. And the cost for the resources would be $3.1 million, and it would be general fund appropriation. And class would consist of 50 paramedically trained firefighters, and the report also mentions the option of using retired firefighters to fill these positions. And I'm joined by Jim Gibson from the fire department for any specific questions you might have.
Okay. Is the $3.1 million estimate still what both of you agree would be the cost of this?
I believe that's based on a February estimate.
Okay, that still stands?
I believe so.
Jim? Okay.
Yeah, I think the original intention was just to find a way that we could find a facility where we could train more people. And I had this conversation with the fire chief, and we decided this was one option to get us towards a more robust fire department. So I think the intention is to start people as paramedics and at some point to cross-train them and make them full firefighters. It's basically a way to get more of a jump on the hiring process. So with that in mind, I'm not sure that the use of retirees works in any particular way. The recommendations seem to call that out. So I would recommend that we don't use retired firefighters as a source of either membership or training, that we go through with our usual process. But beyond that, I think this is a great step to get us a little closer towards having a more fully staffed fire department.
Okay. Mr. Blumen?
Thanks. Thanks for the report on this. I'm eager to see us have a 6th class. I think we're in danger of sort of attriting our way out of any of the gains we're getting with so many of the drop folks dropping out in the next year or so. I'm curious. We have an assumed 20% drill tower attrition rate, right? How many recruits will we actually net through the current 5 drill tower classes approved in the fiscal year when we factor in the estimated 180 sworn we'll lose over the next year due to drop?
So looking at the report that the fire department had generated, if we include the 6th class, we would anticipate that there would be 274 recruits that could be assigned to the field as a result of 343 recruits that are being trained in the academy.
And at the end of the year, that would give us a net gain in the fire department of how many?
Well, it's not as clean as that because of the fact that some of the classes are going to be graduating next fiscal year.
Right.
So, for example, the May class isn't going to graduate until September, and then the June class isn't going to graduate until November. But similarly, in terms of the previous fiscal year, there were classes that were graduating the current fiscal year. So that's why there's the fluctuation in terms of the staffing projections. You know, we can only provide our staffing projections, based on assumptions at any given point in time.
Basically, though, because of the retirements we're getting, we may be taking 3 steps forward, but we're also taking 2.5 steps back. So we're really only inching ahead a little bit, even though it feels like, 6 classes, we're doing a lot. That's really not gaining us a lot.
And you're correct, Councilman. What we indicated in our report is that as of the end of June of this fiscal year, we're projecting that 289 members will be retiring, and if we are able to get 40 recruits going into the field, then that would reduce it by 40, and so the end result would be approximately 250 vacancies would still exist in the field.
So the cost of the class, sixth class, is $3.1 million, right? Correct.
Can I indicate, though, that the cost of that is going to be offset by the salary savings that accrued because of the fact that firefighters that graduate from the academy are paid obviously lower. Issue number one. Issue number two is that they're being paid on straight time. So we did a cost comparison of the previous year and the average hourly rate of the higher ranked members because, for example, a captain can also work in the field in order to fill a field vacancy. And so even though a field position is authorized as a firefighter 3, captains are actually paid at their regular salary plus time and a half. So what we determined is that if we are fortunate enough to get 40 recruits into the field, we can actually realize a salary savings of $300,000 for the first year that they're in the field. So in the long run, it is going to be a benefit to the department.
We'll be saving money.
We would be saving money. We would also, have more bodies in the field.
I was smiling because that's exactly where I was going.
And I did notice your smile, and I appreciated that.
I know. I don't often smile when
no,
we're talking
don't.
to you.
No,
I know.
you don't.
So it's a good new dynamic. Okay, thanks.
Anything further, members?
We appreciate Mr. Bonnet's smile as well.
All right. Thank you. We have one card, Mr. Spindler.
Page 2 of item 7, report by Miguel Santana. Additionally, the outlook does not reflect the recent policy discussions to commit $100 million to address homelessness throughout the city. So you're going to commit that $100 million because you promised. You promised. So you have to add that commitment to that budget. So your budget gap after the $100 million will not be $89.8 million. It will be $189.8 million, including the $100 million for homelessness. But as I told you, there's good news. You have no problems. You have all the money you need plus a lot more because the DWP is giving you a check for $265 million of stolen ratepayer money from the utility to Herb Wesson Jr. And you are councilman, and you can have an equal right to go to Herb Wesson Jr. and ask for some money. Now, for my illegal arrest, I'm going to ask for some money, and so is Mr. Michael Hunt. Join us.
All right, members, I'd move that we appropriate $3.1 million from the reserve fund in order to fund the requested sixth class by the fire department. Second. If there's no objection, that will be the action of the committee. Thank you. That brings us then to our closed session items, I believe. That's all that's left, right? Items 1 and item 2. No, item 8 has been continued.
Have you done item 6, sir? Item 6? Consent, I'm sorry.
Item 6 we dealt with on consent.
Okay. You're correct.
Okay, so that brings up items 1 and 2. Mr. Spindler, you have 2 more minutes to speak about our closed session items, and then we will go into closed session.
Yes, and again, what an appropriate name at item 1. Angela Killings Rodriguez. That's an apropos name for a public property vehicle pedestrian traffic accident. And of course the city is guilty as charged. And again, in item 2, we have somebody called PC versus City of Los Angeles. And this person had to go all the way up to the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals on a civil rights and wrongful death action. So the city had to pay for outside counsel for item 1 and item 2 because Mike Fuhrer and his dingbats over at the city attorney's office couldn't litigate themselves out of a paper bag. Case in point, they charged me and Michael Hunt with 407 and 406, and they couldn't file charges. So outside counsel is needed for all of this technical issues. These fine plaintiffs have been aggrieved. Counsel for these 2 parties have been waiting all day. And they did not have to wait all day. They should have been taken first in order, closed session items, because these people are being paid by the hour, $600, $700 an hour for these fine men and women of the legal profession who know how to sue this city and get justice. Because they know that people can't vote in this city for justice, but they can sue and get justice, as been proven today on items 1 and 2. Now, I'm going to have to go on the freeway, so I'm not going to know what the status is, but under the Brown Act, you're required to report back on the amount of the settlement, if any has been reached, or any activity that occurs on these closed session items. I would further move that these items start being put into open session so we can all see how sausage is made, and in this case, how settlements are made. It would be an educational marvel.
All right. Thank you. That concludes our open session items. We will now proceed into closed session for consideration of item 1. So if you're not here on item 1, please promptly leave the room so that we can conclude our promptly